project I've been wanting to do is upgrade the water cooling block and loop in my system. So that is my system right there, and I'm just going to show you how I currently have it set up right now. Not a huge fan of the way I have it set up, so I got some new stuff to make things a little bit easier, to make things a little bit cleaner. And then I got this off Amazon, the Hydro X Series AM4 water cooling block for the CPU. That was on sale for like 50 bucks Canadian. So I snagged that. It's prettier than the one I have. So I'm going to put that in there, and I'll just show you how I have everything set up. So currently, the way I have this set up is these three fans are intake. That fan is also intake, which is going to be flipped because I want this to be a negative pressure system so that only these fans are bringing air in. It'll promote more air through these fans. Those are exhaust, and those are exhaust through my radiator. So basically I have my reservoir, and it comes out of the pump into the reservoir, out of the reservoir into the CPU. That is an XSPC Raystorm block, quite dated. And then out of the block into the rad, and then through the rad, which is a 360, and then down through a little flow indicator I installed because I wanted to have a little thing in there that spins, and then the pump takes it back in, and that's an EK Waterblocks D5 pump, and then back through the reservoir. What I want to do is I have some 90s and some additional pieces that I've got just to make things look a little bit cleaner. I want to install a new block, and I'm also going to move the radiator. I'm going to try it on the back wall. Still exhausting, so it'll be behind those fans. I'm hoping that I'll get some cool air from here going directly through the rad, maybe improve my temps slightly. And also, as it stands right now, all of the air that goes through this radiator is hot air that also is being expelled from my GPU. So I feel like I'm losing temperature to the fact that it's being cooled by the hot air. So I'm going to move it, see if I can't help that a little bit, and then also maybe increase flow from the bottom through the top. So we'll see. But that's what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to take some clips as I go, and hopefully everything works out. So yeah. Alright, so I have it set up on my little workbench there, just so that I can do my work. And I got the light behind me so I can see what I'm doing. And I got some spare fluid there in a jug, and some tools, some spare tubing, and then I have all of my water cooling parts in there, various things. I'm adding some 90s and some better fittings, stuff like that. My new block is in there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to drain the loop, move the radiator out, take the CPU block off, and then we're going to decide the direction and the layout of how the loop will be after. I haven't really decided yet how I want it to go. So I'm going to do it as I go along and see what looks the best. I have to figure out which way I want the radiator. I'm pretty sure I'm going to put the radiator on the back wall now. On the other side of this radiator, there's a Freezer Mod logo that I like, and I haven't been able to see it because it's on the opposite side, so I'm thinking about rotating it so that I can see that logo. That would put the two fittings at the top back there. So I don't know if that's really going to work, but I'm going to take a look at it. And I also need to find a place for this guy right here. I want that to be visible. So, yeah. But first I have to tear it down, take the water out, make sure nothing gets wet. Just figured I'd take a little clip here. I took the mounting screws out of my CPU, so I'm going to just dismount the block that's there. Even though I've removed the screws, it's not coming loose, which is a good indication that it was a good thermal paste application. But I just want to see what the application on the CPU is. So now that it's been dismounted, if I can get that to focus, we'll just give that a little twist. There, that came off pretty easily, but it's supposed to be that way. And yeah, that was really good coverage, you can tell just by the way it was. It was a full coverage on it, and the way it looks there, it's just because I just twisted it to remove it, but it was a good seal. So yeah, happy with that. So now we have this off, and I'm just going to let that hang so that I can manipulate it to drain the block, or drain the loop. So there we go. It's draining. This part can be very sketchy. As you can see, I've rotated the entire case, but it is working its way out. So now I'm just going to move this around and stuff and try to get all the liquid to come out of the radiator. But yeah, it's draining. Good news. I did it with very, very minimal spilling. So I got the little flow indicator over there. CPU block is dismounted. Everything is drained. Rad is drained, just like that. It's a complete mess right now, but it's required in order to completely redo a loop. And that little bit is all that I spilled. So, yep. Good stuff. Here's an update. So as I move forward, I have removed, yeah, the water cooling loop is out. All the parts are on the other side of the tower and so on. So now what I need to do is I need to remove these 3 fans. The radiator is out as well. And in a perfect world, what I'd love to do is leave those fans attached to that radiator, because those are actual radiator fans. So if I don't have to pull them out, I'm not going to. They're just going to stay on there. And I'm pretty sure I can. So that's no big deal. But those are out. So now what I need to do is remove these 3. And the problem is I have to deal with the wires. RGB fans have a wire for fan and a wire for lights, and then all the other wires that are behind this wall. So I basically have to undo all of my cable management just so that I can move a few key things and then cable manage all of it back together again. So it's quite the task, but I'm gonna get there. I have those 3 fans unplugged, so you know, it is what it is, but it's worth it. I think it's going to look good. There. We are entering peak mess mode. So I've figured out that the Freeze Mod logo isn't really going to work out, visualizing it, because I still have these fan cables, etc., etc. So I'm not going to change the layout of my loop just to try to see that logo. It's not that big of a deal. But things are definitely torn apart. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to mount the radiator to the back wall, and I'm going to put the mount the reservoir using the reservoir mount. There's my dog. And yeah, so I'm going to put the radiator in, and then probably mount the CPU block. And there's my other dog. Yeah. So that's where we're at. CPU block, rad, and then top-mounted fans as well. So, yep. Alright, so I'm doing my best right now to like pre-plan how I'm going to run these tubes, because once I start cutting tubes, I don't have like a whole bunch of extra tubing. So I need to be pretty sure that I know what I'm going to go with. So I have an idea of the pump going into the reservoir like that, and the problem is I'm going to have some tight tubing to do around this area here underneath. But I'm looking at the possibility of mounting the reservoir to that bracket right there, which is a reservoir mount. So let me just pause this for a second to show you what I mean. So this is what I mean. It's mounted to that bracket. It's nice and straight. The pump has a rubber pad underneath. It sits on that fan, which it did before anyway. It looks clean to me. The problem is I have two radiator holes, and the one that's behind the pump, I have to figure out how to go from there maybe into the reservoir, because this one, see, this is intake, and then it pushes water out into the reservoir. Then it goes out of the reservoir, so it could go into the rad, then out of the rad, through the CPU, and then have the pump pulling hot water directly, warm water directly from the block. That would promote flow quite well. I just have to make sure that I can actually manage bends that tight without the tubing wanting to pop off. But I like this, how it looks, and I also need to incorporate a location for a drain valve. So yeah, I'll check back with you here in a minute. Alright, so I have everything there that I was talking about earlier, and now I have my CPU cleaned up and ready for thermal paste. So you can see there it's a 5600G, and then the block that I'm going to be using is the AM4 Hydro X Series from Corsair, which is a nice looking block. Definitely nicer looking than my other one. I like the look of it quite a bit. And I'm actually going to be removing the stock thermal paste, because I'm going to use the thermal paste that I have here, which is the Noctua NTH1. Very popular thermal paste, so I'm going to use it because I don't know anything about the stock thermal paste that Corsair uses. I don't know if it's good, but I've heard lots of good things about Noctua's line. Alright, so it's been a while. It's getting dark. I'm losing daylight from my back window, or the window behind my back. But I'm going to mount the CPU cooler. So the way I have found that I can get the best coverage of my CPU, so what I do is I take some of my thermal paste here and I put it on, and then I take the poor man's glove, which is just a plastic bag, and I put it on over my finger, and I spread all of the paste around so that the entire CPU is covered. And that way my paranoid mind doesn't have a situation where once I put the block on, it's like, hey, man, is there parts of the CPU that aren't covered? Are you going to have problems with temperatures? You should take that off and check. This way I don't have to worry about that. So that is how I apply it. So we're going to do that right now. There. I applied that, and we have a very healthy and full coverage thermal paste application. That's all going to squish out and flatten out very nicely. And now I don't have to worry about it not fully covering. So I'm going to now apply the CPU block. Alright, there we go. The block is applied. There's some fingerprints on there, but that's okay. So now the block is applied. It is very snug. There's no movement there. And those are just all the same amount of tight because I want a good press. Looks crooked because that's my camera angle, but it is straight. That is straight. So now we're going to do some figuring out of tubing. I think that's our next step. That's mounted, reservoirs in place, radiators in place, pumps in place. I might change a little bit to do with the reservoir and the pump. You'll see what I mean, to make things a little bit easier for myself, but everything's in its place. So now comes tubing and fittings. So I have quite a few new fittings, some 90s and some legit compression fittings to make things feel a little bit more comfortable when it comes to tubing popping off. So that's where we're going to go from here. Alright, I'm going to show you what we're working with here as far as fittings go. So each port on the CPU block, I'm going to have a rotary 90 and then a legit compression fitting, and they're all just the Chinese fittings, but because I didn't want to pay for like Corsair or EK Waterblocks fittings. They're expensive, but this is just the rotary 90. They all have the O-ring slots on them, but they're quite well built. And then I have XSPC compression fittings. So I think it's actually going to look quite clean. So I'm going to gear those up, and I'm going to face the 90s in a direction that's going to go over here to where it needs to go. So I think it's going to look pretty good. Alright, an update. So I've been working it out in my head, and I have rotary 90s with compression fittings coming out of the CPU. So it's going to be, let me look at this here. This is a piece of ingenuity right here. Okay, yes. So it's going to be inlet, which is, this is the way it's supposed to be in this block. Inlet, outlet. So outlet is going to go out, it's going to go down, and it's going to go into the pump, which will be here. And then it's going to go, the pump is going to send it into the reservoir, through the reservoir, and then out. And it's going to take a very sharp 90 through here, into the rad, through the rad, be cooled, exit, and it's going to come out this tube, and it's going to go up, which this tube's going to be cut. It's going to go up, and it's going to flow through the flow indicator, and then out through a compression fitting and into the CPU block, and that will be my loop. That was interesting, but that's in there. Not quite straight. I will not allow it to be crooked like that forever. Once things heat up, fill full of water, things will straighten out, and if it doesn't, I will straighten it out, because it will bother me to no end. But as of right now, that's looking pretty good. Things are coming together. Alright. I believe the tubing is done. That was interesting. but it worked out. So we have intake on the pump. So it goes in to the pump, out into the reservoir, and then it goes out of the reservoir. And I will show you here a very tight 90, then straight, then 90, then 90. It's a double 90 to get into that rad. And then through the rad, out of the rad, up through a 90 flow indicator into the block. And then the pump is pulling liquid through the block directly into the pump. So that's where you're going to get your flow. And it's a sealed loop, so it's going to work out really well. So now I just have to install my drain valve and try filling it. Alright, so the loop's done. It is what it is for now, until I get dissatisfied with how it's laid out. A little bit of tweaking and straightening out of things, but like I said before, the pump is pulling directly from the block, so you're going to get flow because it's a closed loop. So it goes through here, into the block and out, into the pump, into the res, out, through the rad. But I also installed a drain valve. So that drain valve is going to be there permanently. It doesn't look too bad, but that's going to add a huge amount of functionality for this loop. So when I need to drain it, I can. It's just going to be way better that way. So now I've double checked all of the fittings. I need to fill it, and I have a spare older power supply over there with a jumper on it so that I can run the pump without turning the PC on, so that I can get things filled up. And just gonna double check for leaks, and then we're going to be putting this thing back together and plugging the wires in. And so the next clip you see will be this system up and running. And just like that, without any effort at all, it's done. And that's definitely not accurate because it took some time. So let's take a little closer look here. There's a significant number of bubbles in the loop right now, but it looks good. Those bubbles will go away in the next few days, but overall, pretty satisfied right now. Everything's running good. That's successful.